We live in a world that constantly demands our attention, people pulling at our energy, expectations pressed onto our shoulders, and an endless stream of noise convincing us we need to keep up, stay visible, stay performing. But there comes a point where you realize that all that noise is pulling you further from yourself. Growth doesn't happen in chaos. Clarity doesn't live in constant reaction. And peace can't exist where you're trying to be everything to everyone. At some point you stop and ask, what if I pulled my energy back? What if I focused on myself, not out of ego, but out of necessity? What if I stayed silent long enough to actually hear my own voice again? This isn't about isolation. This is about intention. It's about tuning out the external noise so you can tune into what truly matters. Because when you get quiet, when you get focused, when you stop explaining, proving, and performing, everything starts to shift. You begin to realize that silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom, that focusing on yourself isn't selfish, it's survival, that detaching doesn't mean you don't care, it means you're finally clear on what you should care about. You start setting boundaries, not to shut people out, but to invite peace in. You stop needing an audience for your growth because you understand it's not about being seen. It's about seeing yourself. This is what it means when we say, when you focus on yourself and stay silent, everything falls into place. Let's talk about that. Silence is more than the absence of noise. It's a conscious decision to disengage from chaos, from meaningless chatter, from opinions that don't pay your bills, heal your wounds, or walk your path. When you learn to stay silent, not out of fear, but from a place of strength, you begin to reclaim your energy. You stop bleeding your attention into places that don't deserve it. You stop performing for approval, reacting to everything, defending your decisions to people who wouldn't understand your journey even if you wrote it out for them. There's a difference between hiding and choosing not to speak. One comes from fear, the other comes from focus. When you focus on yourself, your time becomes sacred. Your peace becomes priority. You begin to understand that not everything requires a response, not every battle is yours to fight, and not every question deserves an answer. That's when silence becomes a filter. It filters out the noise. The gossip, the pressure, the comparisons, the expectations. You stop dancing to a rhythm that's not yours. And in that stillness, you finally hear your own voice. You start to understand what you want, not what the world told you to want. In a culture obsessed with instant responses, where opinions are currency and speed is glorified, silence is a rebellion. It says, I don't owe you my energy. It says, I choose peace over proving. Because that's what most conversations become when you're not focused. An endless need to prove your worth, your intelligence, your strength. But the truth is, the people who are really grounded, who are actually building something lasting, they're not out here explaining themselves. They're too busy becoming who they said they would be. You begin to realize that silence isn't passive, it's an active choice. It's how you say, not everything deserves my voice. Not every situation deserves my reaction. You're not avoiding conflict. You're choosing where to place your power. You're learning that not every fire needs your fuel. And when you stop pouring yourself into everything, you conserve energy for what truly matters. People may not understand it. They might say you've changed. They'll say you've become distant, quiet, hard to reach. Let them. They don't see the inner work you're doing. They don't see the battles you're choosing not to fight, and honestly, they're not supposed to. You don't need to narrate your healing. You don't need to justify your silence. You just need to know why you're choosing it. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop over-explaining, when you stop updating people on every step. When you go quiet, not because you're lost, but because you've finally started listening to yourself, to your needs, to your body, your gut, your soul, that's when things start to align, not because the world changed, but because your focus did. You'll notice how much stronger your decisions become when they're not influenced by 10 different opinions. You'll feel how much lighter your mind is when it's not filled with noise. You'll stop doubting your path when you stop inviting people who were never meant to walk it with you. Silence is not the absence of connection. It's the beginning of a deeper one, one with yourself. This is where everything begins to fall into place, not through loud announcements or public victories, but in the quiet work. The inner discipline, the small choices, the uncomfortable truths, the moments you choose to be still, to reflect instead of react. That's where transformation happens, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. In the silence when no one's watching and it's just you choosing yourself, again and again, there's a narrative that gets pushed, subtly, constantly, that focusing on yourself means yourself, absorbed, selfish, or somehow turning your back on others. But here's the truth. Self-focus isn't selfish. It's essential. It's not about abandoning people or becoming emotionally unavailable. It's about returning to yourself. It's about stepping into your life as the main character, not the supporting role. Because you can't pour into others from an empty cup. You can't lead with clarity if you're clouded by everyone else's expectations. You can't build anything real, peace, love, success, fulfillment, if your foundation is neglect. Self-focus means checking in with yourself before checking in with the world. It means asking, what do I need, before asking, what do they want from me? And that's not arrogance, it's awareness, it's emotional maturity. Because people who don't know what they need end up trying to be everything to everyone. They burn out, they lose themselves, they settle, not because they're weak, but because they never paused long enough to reconnect with themselves. You have a responsibility to understand your triggers, your patterns, your boundaries. You have a responsibility to unlearn the things that keep pulling you into cycles that drain you. You can't do that if you're always available, always performing, always focused on someone else's problems. Self-focus is how you get real about what's working in your life and what's not. It's how you hold yourself accountable, not in a harsh, critical way, but in a conscious, empowered way. It's where growth begins. Some people won't understand this shift. They're used to the version of you that overextends, that says yes out of guilt, that puts yourself last. And when you stop doing that, they might call you cold or distant. Let them. They're reacting to the space you're reclaiming, not because it's wrong, but because they were comfortable with you abandoning yourself. That's not your problem. That's a mirror for them. Your job isn't to shrink to make others feel okay. Your job is to evolve, even if it makes others uncomfortable. When you focus on yourself, your decisions stop being about proving your worth. They start being about honoring it. You make choices not to impress, but to align. You set boundaries not to push people away, but to protect your peace. You slow down not because you're lazy, but because you finally understand that rushing isn't the same as progress. You stop chasing validation and start creating value, real value. From a place that's grounded, not reactive, from a place that's rooted in your truth. Self-focus also helps you get honest about your habits. Are they serving you or sabotaging you? Are you showing up for your goals or just talking about them? Are you building a life that reflects your values or one that pleases others? These are the uncomfortable questions self-focus demands. It's not always pretty, it's not always easy, but it's always necessary. There will be moments where this path feels isolating, where you wonder if you're doing the right thing by stepping back, by saying no, by choosing solitude over social pressure. But the more you stay with it, the more you realize that self-focus is actually what brings the right people closer. The ones who respect your boundaries, the ones who want you to grow, the ones who don't need to be entertained to stay connected. When you focus on yourself, you start attracting people who do the same. Not in a selfish, disconnected way, but in a mature, secure way, in a way that says, I've got me, and I respect that you've got you. Self-focus gives you clarity. It sharpens your decisions. It deepens your confidence. You stop outsourcing your worth to how people respond to you. You stop explaining your evolution. You stop being shocked when people fall away, because now you understand. They were attached to a version of you that no longer exists. That's not loss, that's alignment. You weren't put here to live someone else's dream. You weren't born to constantly fix, perform, or overfunction. You're here to evolve, to become, and you can't do that if your energy is scattered in 1,000 directions. Pull it back, reclaim it, redirect it, not because you're selfish, but because you finally understand. You matter, your peace matters, your voice matters, your life matters. Detachment is not about not caring. It's about caring intentionally. It's about creating space between you and the chaos, between your peace and the pressure to control everything. It's about learning to observe instead of react, to release instead of grip tighter, to trust instead of obsess. Detachment is clarity. It's the moment you stop begging life to be a certain way and instead allow it to reveal what it needs to be. That's when you see clearly. That's when the noise settles and the truth stands tall. We spend so much time trying to force outcomes, relationships, careers, friendships, perceptions. We overanalyze, we overextend, we get attached to how things should look, how people should behave, how life should unfold. And in that space, we lose sight of what's actually real. We chase illusions. We hold on to what's familiar, not because it's right, but because we're scared of the unknown. Detachment disrupts that pattern. It tells you, stop gripping what's slipping, stop drowning in stories that don't serve you. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means you're no longer choosing to carry what's weighing you down. It means you trust yourself enough to release what isn't aligned, even if it once was, even if it's comfortable, even if it used to be everything. Detachment asks, is this still serving your highest self, or are you just afraid to lose it? That's the kind of clarity it brings. Not emotional numbness, not disconnection, but discernment. The kind of wisdom that only comes when you stop trying to control everything. When you detach, you start noticing the difference between what you want and what you need. You may want their approval, but you need peace. You may want that job title, but you need purpose. You may want that relationship to work, but you need respect. Detachment clears the fog. It brings you face to face with reality, not your idea of what something could be, but what it actually is. And that truth can be uncomfortable, but it's also freeing, because once you see clearly, you stop settling. You start holding space for the things that align, not just the things that arrive. You become less reactive. Someone's bad mood doesn't shake you. A delayed plan doesn't destroy your day. You stop giving your power away to every external circumstance. That's not coldness. That's emotional intelligence. That's knowing where you end and the world begins. That's knowing you don't need to control everything to be okay. Clarity comes when you stop trying to fix things that were never yours to fix. You realize that just because something meant a lot doesn't mean it's meant to last. You learn that closure isn't always a conversation. It's a decision to stop reopening wounds for people who never came to heal them. Detachment gives you permission to move forward without bitterness, without baggage, without the weight of needing to be understood. There's a quiet strength in letting go, not in walking away with resentment, but in choosing yourself with grace. Detachment helps you do that. It helps you stop chasing and start receiving. It teaches you that alignment doesn't require force. That love, opportunities, peace, they don't grow in tightly clenched fists. They grow in open hands, in open hearts, in a space where you're willing to release what's not flowing. Because what flows stays. What's forced breaks. You also learn that detachment isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily practice, a moment-to-moment awareness of what you're holding on to and why. It's about checking in with yourself constantly and asking, is this mine to carry? Is this worth my energy? Is this rooted in truth or in fear? Because clarity isn't a destination. It's a result of consistent alignment, of staying honest with yourself even when it's hard. When you begin to live from that place of clear, calm detachment, you don't become passive. You become powerful. You become the kind of person who can walk away with peace, not with anger. The kind of person who can say no without guilt, who can pause before reacting, who can wait without anxiety. That's what clarity brings: emotional freedom, the ability to hold space for yourself first, so you're not pulled in 1,000 directions. You're not here to micromanage life. You're here to flow with it, to show up fully but not cling desperately, to care deeply but not lose yourself in the process. That's the clarity detachment offers: not coldness but calm, not distance but direction, not giving up but letting go of what was never yours to keep. Boundaries are not walls. They're not about shutting people out, living in isolation, or building emotional fortresses so tall no one can reach you. They're doors, intentional, thoughtful, and secure. Doors that you choose to open or close, not because you're defensive or guarded, but because you respect your time, energy, and emotional well-being. That's the difference. Walls are built from fear. Boundaries are built from self-awareness. And until you understand that, you'll keep confusing overextension with kindness, people pleasing with connection, and burnout with loyalty. We're taught early on to equate saying yes with being good, agreeable, even lovable. But what they don't tell you is that constantly saying yes when you mean no is the fastest route to resentment, to exhaustion, to losing yourself in the name of keeping the peace. Boundaries help you stop that cycle. They remind you peace isn't just about external harmony, it's about internal honesty. If you're not being honest about what you need, what you can handle, and what you're available for, then you're not in a real relationship with anyone. You're just performing, and performance is not connection. Real connection requires clarity. It requires the courage to say, "This is okay with me, that is not. I love you, but I won't abandon myself to keep you comfortable." That's not cruelty, that's maturity. It's showing up from a place of truth, not obligation. And yes, it's uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to being the one who's always available, always agreeable, always overcompensating. Setting boundaries can feel like betrayal to the people who benefited from your lack of them, but that's okay. The ones who truly value you will adjust. The ones who only valued your compliance may fall away. Let them. Because every time you say yes to something misaligned, you're saying no to something sacred: yourself, your healing, your capacity to rest, to grow, to focus. Boundaries protect those things. They're not punishments, they're parameters, guidelines for what you will and won't accept in your space. And when you start enforcing them, your energy shifts. You stop being drained by constant emotional labor. You stop tolerating behavior that feels heavy. You stop explaining your limits like they're negotiable. They're not. Boundaries are how you teach the world to treat you, not by demanding, but by demonstrating. Not by yelling, but by deciding. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth. You just need to stop giving access to people who don't honor it. And that starts with you. Because if you don't respect your own boundaries, no one else will. People don't cross lines you've drawn. They cross lines you haven't enforced. When you start building boundaries, you begin to see how much of your past was shaped by a lack of them. You see the relationships where love was confused with control, the friendships that thrived on imbalance, the environments where burnout was glorified as dedication. You start reclaiming your space and with it your power. You stop apologizing for needing rest, for saying no, for choosing yourself. That's not selfish, that's self-respect. And the more you do it, the more empowered you feel, because suddenly you're not living reactively, you're living intentionally, you're choosing where your energy goes. You're deciding what deserves your presence, you're opening the door when it feels right, and closing it when it doesn't. That's not being closed off, that's emotional sovereignty. That's saying, I trust myself enough to know what's good for me, and what's not. Boundaries also invite in the right people, the ones who don't just tolerate your no, but respect it, the ones who see your self-respect and match it with their own. Because when you set boundaries, you don't just protect yourself, you raise the standard for what kind of energy you're willing to engage with, and that shift changes everything. You stop attracting chaos. You stop settling for less. You start building connections that are rooted in mutual respect, not one, sided sacrifice, so no, boundaries aren't walls. They're the framework for a healthy, intentional life. They're how you make sure that the love you give starts with you. They're how you move through the world with clarity, not confusion, with confidence, not guilt, with presence, not pressure. Because the truth is, you don't owe anyone unlimited access to your time, energy, or emotions. You owe yourself the space to choose when, how, and to whom that door opens. Your growth doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need applause, validation, or commentary. It doesn't have to be documented, liked, shared, or approved. In a world where everything is performed, where every step forward is turned into content and every private moment is up for public consumption, it's easy to forget that some of the most powerful transformations happen in silence. Off the screen, away from the noise, growth, real growth, is an internal process, and it's often messy, slow, and invisible to everyone but you. You don't owe anyone a play of your healing. You don't need to prove that you're working on yourself. The people who are truly doing the work don't have time to constantly announce it. They're too busy feeling it, living it, confronting parts of themselves that no one sees. Growth isn't glamorous. It's not a highlight reel. It's uncomfortable truths. It's sitting with your own flaws. It's unlearning toxic habits that once felt like survival. It's waking up and choosing differently, even when no one is watching. We're conditioned to believe that progress only matters if it's visible, that if it's not being noticed, it's not real. But that belief pulls you away from the real work. It makes the journey about optics, not authenticity. And that's where growth loses its meaning, when it becomes a performance rather than a transformation, when it becomes about convincing others rather than changing yourself. True growth doesn't need to be seen to be significant. It just needs to be real. The most profound shifts are often quiet. They happen in the way you respond instead of react, in the way you hold your boundaries instead of breaking them to please someone, in the way you pause before falling into the same old habits. No one may see that, no one may clap for it, but that's okay. Because the reward for growth isn't recognition, it's freedom, peace, alignment, and those things can't always be measured from the outside. Your growth is for you, not for the people who doubted you, not for the ones who hurt you, not even for the ones cheering you on. It's for the version of you that got tired of pretending, the version of you that realized something had to change. That version deserves your full attention. Because growth is not a performance, it's a return to your truth, to your strength, to your clarity. And you don't need an audience for that. You just need honesty. There's a quiet confidence that comes from doing the work with no spotlight, from making decisions that reflect your values, even if no one sees the sacrifice behind them, from choosing the hard path not because it looks good, but because it feels right. That kind of growth isn't loud, but it's real, it lasts, and over time, it shows in the life you build, in the energy you protect, in the people you surround yourself with. Not in your posts, not in your stories, but in your peace. It's tempting to share everything, to seek validation from others, to feel seen, to prove that you're not who you used to be. But when your healing becomes something you need to constantly display, it risks becoming a brand instead of a breakthrough. And the truth is, you don't need anyone else to understand your process. You just need to stay committed to it, stay honest within it, stay present for it. There's also protection in privacy. When you keep your growth sacred, you shield it from projection, judgment, and unnecessary opinions. Not everyone deserves access to your becoming. Not everyone will understand your evolution, and that's fine. They're not meant to. What matters is that you understand it, that you trust it, that you stay with it, even when no one else is clapping. Growth without an audience is a declaration. I'm doing this for me. It's a reclamation of self. It's the quiet courage to face yourself every day and choose better, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. Because that's the part that counts, not the show but the substance, not the performance but the practice, not the noise but the internal shift. You don't need to narrate your evolution, you just need to live it. Let it speak through your choices, let it echo through your presence, let it reflect in the life you're building quietly, consistently, intentionally. Growth is not about being seen, it's about seeing yourself more clearly. And when you start doing that, everything begins to change, not because the world sees it, but because you finally do.